the National Endowment for the Humanities, bringing you the stories that define us.
My name is Braxton Redeagle. I'm a certified teacher for the Osage Nation Language Department. I teach the Osage language in a couple of our local high schools as a certified teacher. I'm certified through the State Department of Education for Oklahoma. So my classes are world language credits that count towards their graduation. So they can take the Osage language instead of taking a Spanish or some other world language. And that's the position I'm in now. I do a lot more than just that. So being a language teacher of some, an indigenous language, and Osage in particular, my job also requires that I do a lot of research and analysis, do a lot of reading of old materials, listening to old audios, and trying to do a lot of reconstruction of the language in effort to revitalize the language and put together a curriculum that can actually push the language along and teach people to speak. And so I know a lot of tribes have people that can speak, and they might have good curriculum, but everybody seems to have this challenge of creating new speakers. And so a lot of my research is geared towards trying to figure out how to take the language and the materials and organize classes that are going to lead to that. So I think most people that work with the Osage language in some form have either used La Flesche's dictionary or own a copy of it. I have a hard copy and a digital copy, so I've used quite a bit of his work in those forms. I've also read a lot of the ethnology reports that he helped contribute to, and from some of those reports he's produced cultural books that pertain to old rites and different aspects of the religion that's no longer practiced today. But a lot of that has a lot of old language in there. So I've definitely familiar with La Flesche. I'm definitely familiar with his work, and I've read countless pages and spent countless hours reading the materials that he's produced. In my classroom in particular, they're used to the extent that I've kind of used them as different sources, primary sources, to put together the curriculum and teach the things that I'm teaching. I've taken a lot of his work, compared it and contrasted it with other people's work, like James Owen Dorsey, Carolyn Quintero, and I've kind of used all these different sources to try to put together the best teaching materials that I can do. So I still use it. I have, like I said, I have his dictionary on my desk. I have links to the ethnology reports on my desktop and on my computer that I have with me. And I reference those things almost on a weekly basis. And a lot of times it might be for fun, that I'm just trying to figure out something culturally that I'm interested in. Sometimes I use it to kind of get insight as a primary source to some of my relatives that he worked with, back 120 years ago or so. And sometimes I use it as just a straightforward reference, like I'm looking for a word or a sentence or a phrase or an expression. So I use it for a variety of different purposes. But like I said, it's really invaluable to have the language documented at the time that he documented it, with the informants that he had, the degree of detail that he has in there. And like I said, he's got some really old language and a lot of it in there, and a lot of really good details about rites and ceremonies that we put away. We don't perform them anymore, but he has a lot of really good detail in there about him. As a department, I would probably say, and as a community, I'd probably say the dictionary that he produced, because that's the thing that people tend to gravitate toward. It's straightforward. It gives it to you in something in a format that they're familiar with, because people use dictionaries, so that makes it easy for them to understand how it's laid out, and it feels comfortable for them. So I'd say overall, his dictionary is probably the most referenced. For myself personally, I think I'm at a position in my study of the language where I don't particularly reference any real dictionaries like that. I might look at sentence examples and looking for ways to break down different structures or different elements of the language, but I don't particularly use the dictionaries in and of themselves in that way, the way most people do. So for the most influential work that he's produced that I've used is more usually cultural related, and I'm looking for aspects of cosmology or religion, worldview, society structures, those kind of things. And so that's typically what I'm looking for in there. And again, like I said, I really enjoy getting some of those kind of personal experience that he had with different informants of the Osage tribe that he worked with. At the time period I'm in now, I have a lot of different resources to pull from. So I use the dictionaries and databases and teaching materials from all the Redeagle tribes. Like, I've watched their videos, and I've talked to some people and met them today that I've watched their videos years ago, and I finally got to meet them. So in my personal experience with La Flesche, I'd say that I've kind of at a point where I don't have to reference his primary sources directly for the language revitalization, but there was a lady named Carolyn Quintero who done a lot of analysis, a lot of work on the Osage language, the way that it's been documented, the way that it was spoken by some of our speakers back in the 80s and the 90s, and then trying to do comparative work herself. And so I reference a lot of her work, which is indirectly referencing La Flesche's work. Now, when I do that, like I said, I use comparative stuff. So I will look at her work, and then I'll reference La Flesche, and then I'll reference some of the other Redeagle tribes and try to get some sort of idea of how this thought or this word or this expression or how this sentence works. I'm trying to take all these data points and figure out where they fit in the scheme of things. And La Flesche is a big piece of that, and his dictionary is a big piece of that. His reports that he's produced, the books that he's produced, those are all big pieces of that, but it's all kind of one overarching body of work, or at least the way that I see it. Even the Redeagle language materials in themselves are kind of a body of work that I consider to be Osage language. Even though they're not Osage, I use them as references in that way. So I would say that, again, there's kind of a different distinction to be made between how people in the past have used this work, including people in our community, versus how they do it now, and then how they do it now versus how I do it now too. I think I spend more time studying the language and doing this research than the average person has time for. I'm blessed to be in a position where I get paid to do it. So I feel like it's kind of my charge to do it for other people. Well, the first ones wouldn't be even really about language, I don't think. I'd probably talk to him more about those informants that he worked with. I'd want to know personality things. I'd want to know mannerisms. I'd want to know the little things that don't get captured. Kind of interjectional speech. What did they say when they got hurt? What would you say when you got scared? Little things that usually slip through the cracks of documentation. Those kind of things, the little expressions. So I'd probably start something small in that area, and that would naturally progress into different cultural things. And that still is a little bit of language, and you can't really talk about culture without really getting into language. So it would just naturally progress, I think, from there into kind of more language specific things. But I would definitely start with the informants and personality, those the little things, intangible things even, and I kind of want to know that. And I think I'd also have questions kind of about his methodologies too, because when I read through a lot of different ethnologists or linguists, especially with the further back you go, you don't get so much of a clear idea of how they actually proceeded to do interviews or how they proceeded to document things, and if they did, it's kind of not to the degree that the scientific community holds now. So I think I would have to have a discussion about that methodology. Say, how did you conduct these interviews? What language were the interviews conducted in? A lot of people probably don't ever think about that, but if he could speak the Omaha language and he's talking to Osage people, they could have talked back and forth and have been mutually intelligible. So that could cause some confusion in the interviews that most people might not really identify readily. So I would probably have a discussion on his methodologies too. I think I would, and I'm sure he's got books and he's written about it, but being outside the scope of my work, I haven't taken the time to really look at it. But I would ask him about his own personal experience and growing up and his own culture and the things that contributed to his life and his decision to take up this kind of work and what motivated him. And I think that we could get into a lot of his own kind of personal identity, his own personal beliefs, and I think that would shed a light on kind of the perspective that I might need to take whenever I'm reading a lot of his work. It might help in that regard. But just in general, I would like to know probably more about him and kind of the culture bits, like what were the norms and what were the customs whenever he was a child, and his own language journey, his own language experience. And it's kind of something that I really wish that I had been born a lot earlier. That way I could talk to these elders that could speak multiple languages. They could speak English, they could speak Osage or Omaha, and just get a sense of how that fits into the scheme of the way that they perceive the world. How does that control how they process information, the perspectives that they take? And then again, they living in a different time period, they lived in a drastically different world. So they have a completely different worldview, not just because of culture, but because of the time period and the interactions with the communities around them. And then the encroaching dominant society that was coming in, that was more kind of Western European coming here, just to kind of see that kind of progression in his own life. Because I've had those kind of conversations with my own grandpa, and he'd tell me about just little things that you just don't ever really think about. Like he remembers his time growing up and the languages that were spoken around him and where he would go in the summers, the different social events or the different cultural events he'd attend, and the languages that those people used to communicate. And I think I've just been really fortunate that on multiple sides of my family, I've had people that worked in culture and they worked in language. They were informants, they were translators, they were people that helped linguists and ethnologists document culture and language. So I think I'm just in a fortunate position where I get to do that for a living now. And so I really appreciate the position I'm in, the position that all the people that came before me helped provide, because not all of our Degi people or even any other tribal communities necessarily have the structure to have people in a position that I'm in, where they get to research and read and produce materials and create curriculum and engage our young people in that journey through their language and culture. And this is, I can't really say any one of those words alone. They kind of just go hand in hand, and I just think that I'm very blessed to be in that position, and I appreciate the work that you guys are doing here to kind of make this documentation, and that you're bringing someone like La Flesche kind of back into the light here, and the museum and the programs you're working with overseas, they're doing the same thing, that they would try to create that kind of amicable relationship, and they'd actually reach out to our people, to people up there up north where you guys are from. And I see a lot of good things here, I think.